Hello, welcome to this video where we will talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, one of the longest and bloodiest in the Middle East. My aim is to provide you with the necessary information to understand current events. What is the origin of this dispute? What are the consequences for the people living in the area? Is there any hope for peace? We will try to answer these questions in a simple and objective manner. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict dates back to the early 20th century when a movement called Zionism emerged, advocating for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, a region that belonged to the Ottoman Empire and was predominantly inhabited by Arabs and other Muslim communities. Zionism was fueled by the anti-Semitism faced by Jews in Europe, especially during World War II and the Nazi Holocaust. Many Jews migrated to Palestine and purchased land from Arab landowners. This generated resistance among the local populations, who felt displaced and threatened by the newcomers. Increasingly violent clashes occurred between both groups. After the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, the League of Nations mandated the United Kingdom to administer the territory of Palestine. However, the British made various contradictory promises to both Arabs and Jews, which they later did not fulfill. This created an atmosphere of tension and mistrust between Arab nationalists and Zionists. In 1947, the United Nations approved a plan to divide Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab. The Jewish state would occupy 55% of the territory, including the Negev desert, with a population of 500,000 Jews and 400,000 Arabs. The Arab state would occupy 44% of the territory, with a population of 725,000 Arabs and 10,000 Jews. The remaining 1% would be allocated to Jerusalem, which would come under international control due to its religious significance to Muslims, Jews, and Christians. The Jews accepted the plan, but the Arabs rejected it, arguing that it was unfair and illegitimate. A civil war erupted in Palestine between Jews and Arabs, leading to the expulsion or flight of 2/3 of the Palestinian population. On May 14, 1948, one day before the end of the British Mandate, Jewish leaders declared the independence of the State of Israel. The next day, 5 Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, invaded Israel to support the Palestinians. This marked the beginning of the First Arab-Israeli War, which lasted until 1949 and ended with an Israeli victory. Israel expanded its territory to 78% of Palestine, while Egypt retained control of the Gaza Strip, and Jordan retained the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Since then, several wars have occurred between Israel and its Arab neighbors, such as the Sinai War in 1956, the Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and the Lebanon War in 1982. In all of these conflicts, Israel has managed to maintain or expand its control over the occupied territories, despite UN resolutions calling for its withdrawal. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, was established, bringing together various Palestinian armed groups with the goal of fighting against Israel and reclaiming their homeland. The PLO carried out numerous terrorist attacks inside and outside of Israel, leading to Israeli reprisals against its bases in Lebanon, Jordan, and Tunisia. In 1987, the First Intifada began, a popular Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation in Gaza and the West Bank. The Intifada was characterized by the use of stones, Molotov cocktails, and strikes as forms of resistance. Israel responded with security measures, detentions, and targeted assassinations. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed between Israel and the PLO, mutually recognizing their existence and establishing a phased peace process. The Palestinian Authority, PA, was created, assuming control of certain areas in Gaza and the West Bank. It was expected that within 5 years, a final solution would be negotiated regarding the status of these territories, the fate of Palestinian refugees, the future of Jerusalem, and the recognition of borders. However, the peace process was hindered by the failure to fulfill commitments, ongoing violence, the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 by a Jewish extremist, the expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, and the lack of consensus between the parties. In 2000, the Second Intifada occurred following the collapse of the Camp David summit and the visit of Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, considered a holy site by both Muslims and Jews. The Second Intifada was more violent than the first and included suicide attacks by Palestinian groups such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Israel responded with military operations, targeted assassinations, house demolitions, blockades, and the construction of the separation barrier. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, but retained control of the airspace, territorial waters, and borders. In 2006, Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections, leading to a political crisis and an armed confrontation with Fatah, the party of President Mahmoud Abbas. Hamas took control of Gaza, while Fatah retained control of the West Bank. Since then, there have been two rival Palestinian governments. In 2008 to 2009, 2012, and 2014, Israel launched 3 military offensives against Gaza to halt rocket attacks by Hamas and other armed groups. These operations resulted in thousands of casualties and significant infrastructure damage in Gaza. There were also fatalities among Israeli soldiers and civilians living near the border. In 2017, U.S. President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moved the U.S. Embassy to the city. This decision broke with the international consensus that considered the status of Jerusalem should be negotiated between Israelis and Palestinians. Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. The move sparked protests and condemnation across the Arab and Muslim world. In 2020, Trump presented his Middle East peace plan, which heavily favored Israeli demands. The plan included Israeli annexation of the Jordan Valley and a significant portion of the West Bank, as well as recognition of Jerusalem as its indivisible capital. In return, it offered Palestinians a demilitarized and fragmented state with a capital in the outskirts of Jerusalem. The plan was rejected by Palestinians and criticized by much of the international community. In 2021, a new escalation of violence occurred between Israel and Hamas after a series of tensions in East Jerusalem related to the forced eviction of Palestinian families, restrictions on access to the Temple Mount during Ramadan, and marches and provocations by Jewish extremist groups. Hamas launched hundreds of rockets from Gaza into Israel, and Israel responded with aerial and ground attacks. Violence also spread to the West Bank and mixed cities within Israel, where clashes occurred between Arabs and Jews, as well as acts of vandalism and lynching. The humanitarian crisis worsened in Gaza, with shortages of water, electricity, medicine, and food. After 11 days of fighting, a ceasefire mediated by Egypt was reached, ending the worst escalation of violence since 2014. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the most complex and difficult to resolve in the world. It affects not only the lives of millions of people who suffer from violence, occupation, blockade, discrimination, and a lack of rights, but also the stability and security of the entire region. Furthermore, it has political, economic, religious, and cultural implications that transcend borders. I created this video due to the current escalation of the conflict. I won't discuss recent events in detail, as the information is too confusing and biased, but by understanding the history, we can gain insight into what is happening and what might unfold in the future.